It is rarely the guy that we expect it to be. Had we taken a poll a few days ago after Nick Saban's retirement, I'm sure Kalen DeBoer would have come in on down the list. Not Lane Kiffin, not Dabo Sweeney, not Mike Norvell, not Dan Lanning, not Steve Sarkisian. And then there was a late run, apparently, and some consideration given to Mike Locksley, Maryland head coach, Tommy Rees, the offensive coordinator at Alabama, certainly had some support on campus within the team itself, the locker room, the coaching staff. And then, lo and behold, Lane Kiffin of Ole Miss, actually some consideration. But when it came right down to it, Washington's Kalen DeBoer, a champion, a winner, who has gone to 3 stops and has done nothing but win, and win with class and integrity and gain a lot of friends and a lot of support. Kalen DeBoer. How about that? Does it sound right? Does it ring? Kalen DeBoer, the Alabama head football coach. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. We appreciate your support. We appreciate your contributions. We appreciate your comments and your questions. We will look at them in the live chat, but to have your voice heard, of course, give us a call. We have left the link in the live chat section and also the super chat as well. All right, let's get to the particulars at hand, and then we will start going through your calls. So this coming down from ESPN, Mark Schlabach and Chris Lowe. Washington's Kalen DeBoer, who guided the Huskies to a Pac-12 championship and a spot in the College Football National Championship game this past season, has agreed to a deal to become the next head football coach at Alabama. According to sources, DeBoer informed the Huskies on Friday he is leaving for Bama. Sources told ESPN's Pete Thamel a deal is expected to be made official later today. Okay, DeBoer, 49 years old, would inherit, of course, one of the most coveted jobs in college football, one of the most difficult, replacing Sabin, 9 SEC championships, 6 national titles, 17 years at the school. 206-29, the record for Nick Saban at Bama. Washington AD Troy Dannon has made an aggressive pitch to keep DeBoer, sources told Thamel, with a new contract that would make him one of the 10 highest paid coaches in FBS, more than double his current salary of $4.2 million per year. DeBoer would owe Washington a $12 million buyout if he leaves. He signed a 2-year contract extension through the 2028 season in November. DeBoer has emerged as the Tide's top target, even before 3 other possible candidates, Lanning, Norvell, Sarkisian, withdrew from the search and affirmed their commitments to their current teams. Washington hired DeBoer to resurrect its program, 4-8. Jimmy Lake, of course, got the Indiana transfer in Michael Penix at quarterback, underestimating Washington's high-flying offense. The Huskies more than doubled their victory total. They went 11-2 in 2022. This past season, of course, 12-0 during their regular season on through the Pac-12 championship game, the Texas win in the playoff, and then Michigan. DeBoer's hiring at Alabama would be the apex of a meteoric rise in coaching. Consider this: over the past few seasons, record-setting receiver at the University of Sioux Falls, an NAIA program in his home state of South Dakota, DeBoer became head coach of his alma mater in 2005. So let's see, he was about 31 years old at the time. Over the next 5 seasons, his teams went 67-3. That's pretty good. 3 national championships, 06, 08, and 09. The Cougs went 17-2 in the playoffs. Then this is the rise. Southern Illinois as offensive coordinator Eastern Michigan as OC, Fresno State, then Indiana, where, of course, he formed a relationship with Michael Penix. DeBoer replaced Jeff Tedford as Fresno State's coach in 2020. The Bulldogs went 3-3 in the COVID year, then improved to 9-3 in a second season, which included an upset win over nationally ranked UCLA and also San Diego State. And then it was on to Washington, and the rest is history. Kalen DeBoer, unless there is some kind of negotiation breakdown, which I don't believe there's going to be one with Bama, whether his heartstrings are pulled by Washington and the commitment there, and they come close to the Alabama range, which you got to consider the top coaches in college football are in the $10 to $12 million range. Kirby Smart, Jim Harbaugh, Ryan Day, and others. And if he's going to be in the top 10, and then Washington, it looks as though they are going to increase the offer to about $8.5 million per year. I would think that Kalen DeBoer is thinking more along the lines of legacy and what he can achieve in the sport. He is staying in one of the two great leagues in the sport, the Big Ten or the SEC, either way. However, it's Alabama. It's Alabama. It's the opportunity to continue the legacy of Bear Bryant and Nick Sabin. Of course, there were others along the line, but this history basically built on Bear Bryant and Nick Sabin. All right, let's get to the lines here at the Voice of College Football. We've got Jeffrey calling in. Jeffrey, welcome as always.
I appreciate that, Mark. That was fast. We went from it looked like Dan Lanning. I mean, it's kind of like, it reminds me of the Mark Stoops to A&M. Like, that was a done deal. It looked like, I mean, I remember telling you I even had the thumbnail already made for it, and then it didn't happen. And then Mike Elko's the one that decided to go to Texas A&M. And then you had Dan Lanning, Will, Todd guy. Everybody's telling me it's gonna be Dan Lanning. He's making the trip. And then there was a whole deal: is he not making the trip, and all that. And it was crazy. I thought after that it was gonna end up being Mike Norvell. And then the Florida State stuff came out. I will ask that first. Do you think that the Mike Norvell ordeal fell through because of the announcement that Florida State was in trouble?
That's a great question. That's a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
That is a possibility that it could have something to do with that. Although I got to think that Alabama is going to select the coach that they're going to select. And I don't know that Mike Norvell, I haven't really looked into the NIL situation with Florida State and what went down there and what possible connection. These coaches are supposed to not have involvement with the NIL. They all do. They all do.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think so, but it's an interesting question. And I'm not saying that there's no way that that's not a possibility, but I would think that it's a relatively, again, I haven't looked at it to the extent that I should to make a comment on how severe it is. But my thought is that Alabama's choosing who they want, and they had a list and they had their priorities, and they obviously talked to, well, they didn't get a chance to talk to Lanning. They didn't get a chance to talk to Sark, apparently. And then they talked to the rest of these guys, and they went with the list.
It's crazy. I don't know. Like you said, they shouldn't have involvement, but it is what it is with that. But with Mike Norvell, I voted on your Twitter poll. I put him in because I really thought it was going to be him for a while, for a day and a half. It's like it all shifted so quick. And then with Kalen DeBoer, I was like, that would be the inverse of Ryan Grubb, because Alabama was trying to get Ryan Grubb to become the offensive coordinator last year from Washington, and he did not make the jump. And then now you're going to be getting Kalen DeBoer as the head coach, and it looks like this is a done deal. So it's just kind of ironic there. And my mind's just like, 4 years ago, he was the Indiana offensive coordinator. Do you know how big of a jump the Indiana offensive coordinator job is from the Alabama head coaching job? Like, that is insane. 4 years difference from Indiana as an offensive coordinator, not a head coach, but an offensive coordinator, to now he's going to be hired at Alabama. I'm happy for Kalen DeBoer. I mean, like you mentioned, when he was at the really small school in South Dakota, he won there. And then he was successful as an offensive coordinator, successful at Fresno State, successful at Washington. I guess it's kind of like Indiana hiring Kurt Signetti. He's won wherever he's been. And Kalen DeBoer now has won wherever he's been, his meteoric rise. It's a little interesting, though, because Alabama, you hired a sure thing with Nick Saban because he won a national title at LSU. With Kalen DeBoer, I know he was really close this year, but he still hasn't coached at the highest level of college football for very long. And his most of his success was with Michael Penix. We don't know how Washington was going to look next year. It was Washington, or were they going to be able to have close to the same success? I mean, I'm not like 100% this is going to work, but I am happy with the hire because, again, he's won wherever he's been. And I think that it has a better chance than not working out. But were you really surprised by this move? Because, I mean, I'm kind of surprised, but the more I think about it, not really.
Well, I would have been surprised had you said that all these other guys were in play and they were options. But once Lanning said no, Sark said no, then really the rest of the lineup. So we just posted a video. We had a conversation with Stephen M. Smith, Touchdown Alabama, brought him on. He knows what's going on there. He goes to every game. He's been covering that team forever. He goes on Feinbaum's show. So my question to him, he really thought it was down to, he thought DeBoer was the front runner and thought that Lane Kiffin was a possibility, that he had moved back into the conversation. And I just thought, well, most likely it's going to be DeBoer, because I just think that you got to consider there's an administration and there's a handful of people making a decision, and they all have to be extremely confident and comfortable with that hire. And I've got to think that there is a high chance that one or more of those people are not comfortable with Lane Kiffin being the head coach at Alabama because he says a lot of questionable things. I don't think much of it's that harmful, so I don't make a big deal about it. I don't think it's that huge of a deal, but there is a certain decorum at Alabama, and there is a replacement for Nick Saban. And I do believe, and I'm not the first one to say this, that I'm sure that they wanted Nick Saban's blessing in this situation. Now, how much I bet they consulted Nick Saban a ton, not because of, number one, of who he is, and number two, because if you've got a situation of transition, so think about any big time coach who has left on their own accord and then handed the job to somebody else. I know that Ryan Day was basically handpicked by Urban Meyer. Lincoln Riley was basically handpicked by Bob Stoops. So there you've got two legendary coaches that said, here's the guy. Now, they didn't have the guy within the structure on campus right there, but you got Nick Saban, who had an offensive coordinator, in Lane Kiffin, who's now a highly successful coach in the same conference. So I don't know if Nick Saban said you can go either way, or who knows what the conversation was. I know that we know the history between Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin, and we had this conversation the other night, the two of us, and we saw it from different ways, but we both agree it's been mixed. That when they were working on the same sideline, boy, the national TV cameras caught it enough times that Nick Saban wasn't too happy with Lane Kiffin, but he also grew to respect him, knew that he certainly changed the offense, provided them with a different path to a national championship, and Nick Saban has credited Lane Kiffin with that. But when push came to shove, more people, I'm sure, were more comfortable feeling that Kalen DeBoer was a safe pick. And then to your point about winning, even though DeBoer's only done it for a couple of years, and even though he did not win the national championship, when you look at Washington football and where it's been the last few years, and look at Michigan football, Jim Harbaugh, I know they were only a 4-point underdog, but in the grand scale, they were a pretty heavy underdog. So them getting to a national championship game was just icing on the cake, gravy, whatever you want to call it. So he won big games. He got through a conference, won a conference championship game, won a playoff game. So he showed on the biggest stage that he could prepare his teams to compete against the likes of Oregon and Texas and win those games, something Lane Kiffin has yet to do.
I agree with that. And I mean, it's kind of like you mentioned Washington being a big underdog, and the fact that a few years ago, I mean, you had the Jimmy Lake tenure and they were really in bad shape, and how quickly they turned around. So I think that definitely is tremendous. Lane Kiffin is, a lot of people are mixed on him. I like Lane Kiffin. I mean, he's a good offensive coach. He has a lot of things going for him. And yes, the cameras aren't always going to catch any possible negative connotations. It's the way it is. I remember when the camera cut to Cale Williams when he was upset after they lost that game this year. And it was like, I mean, come on. I mean, sometimes – like, it's not always, the worst possible situation. Sometimes it is what it is. The camera's going to catch it. But still, I think that Lane Kiffin has a lot of positives. I know his negatives. People talk about it all the time. But I wouldn't have been completely opposed to Lane Kiffin. But I think because Kalen DeBoer is more of, I guess you would say, he's less controversial and he's had more success recently than Lane Kiffin ever has. That's why it's a better hire than Lane Kiffin, and it makes more sense. Now, I will say, I don't know if you think this matters. One thing I am a bit concerned, though, and I know Alabama's got the resources, so it's not that big a deal wherever you're from, but a lot of the other guys that Alabama was looking at, they're from the South. Mike Norvell's been down South. You talk about Lane Kiffin, he's been mostly in the South. You talk about Steve Sarkisian, all those guys. The problem with Kalen DeBoer is he's never been in the SEC basically ever. All the stops are more in the northern part of the country. I don't think that matters necessarily, but I remember when Brian Harsin got hired from Boise State and when he went to Auburn, everybody was talking about that. Like, oh my goodness, he's not going to fit in the SEC. It's not going to work. Well, could that apply to Kalen DeBoer a bit as well? Like, it's an adjustment, him going basically to be in the southern part of the country for the first time ever.
Well, I think it is something to be considered. I think it's a talking point, but I don't think that it's a concern of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll cite these people. Your classic example and most recent, from a historical standpoint, recent history that was just a boom was Urban Meyer had never
Mm-hmm.
coached in the South or the SEC. He was at Utah, his roots in Ohio, and boom, he's a national champion twice. Brian Kelly, of course, we're still feeling out whether he's going to be able to navigate that. What he did the first 2 years is pretty much, for me, is kind of a push, is kind of even. Anybody that knows upside up and downside down can win 9 or 10 games at LSU. So Brian Kelly has something to prove to me. He's not been a disaster by any stretch, but they've just been okay. They've been fine. Dan Mullen is a Northeastern guy who went to Mississippi State and won after a little tenure at Florida as an OC, and then won at Florida for a few years. Had a really good team for 3 years. So I'm not that concerned, but I do think it's worth discussing it. I'm sure that those discussions are had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Brian Kelly, Lincoln Riley debate that you were having with Tim way back then, that was hilarious. So we'll have to see if Brian Kelly can make a lot more fans happy, especially at the accent thing at the beginning. Just bad starts of the tenure, but he's possibly can still turn it around. For Kalen DeBoer, opening press conference, just talk the same way. Don't do anything. But I mean, I do believe that. I think to your point, it's not a big deal, especially if you just win, if you recruit. And Alabama has the resources. Auburn's a tougher job anyway. Like when Brian Harsin took that over, that's a tough job right now because the SEC is uber competitive, and Auburn is a great job. They've got a great fan base, but it's just hard to win there right now. Alabama, you don't have that problem because it's one of the best programs in college football. You're leaving, Nick Saban left it in great hands. So I think Kalen DeBoer is more likely going to work out. I just thought that was an interesting thing. I will say I was very nervous though when Mike Locksley was entering the conversation. I was like, no,
Mike Locksley.
No way Alabama's going to hire Mike Locksley. I'm like, between Locksley or Reese, I would go Tommy Reese, and I don't want Tommy Reese to get the job either. But Mike Locksley, I mean, did they see his record before Maryland? It's bad. I
Yeah,
mean,
to
I know he's done
me, Mike
decent, but
Loxley's doing a nice job at Maryland, but in no way is he positioned himself to be the head coach at Alabama. I
no
just
way.
and that was brought up in our conversation with Stephen M. Smith, and somebody brought it up last night. So I believe that there was legitimacy there, that he was under consideration. Maybe they reached out to him, whatever, but no.
Yeah, like that would be a massive downgrade. I mean, just I don't know. They were chanting, "We don't want Dabo." I don't know if you saw that on Twitter, but everybody's like, "We don't want Dabo." Well, if you don't want Dabo, you don't want Mike Loxley. Again, nothing against him, but just absolutely no way.
What has happened to Dabo Sweeney's reputation with some people, to me, is way, way, way
I still like
overstated.
Dabo. I
He's
really
still
do.
a really good coach. Again, he's got to use the transfer portal.
Has to. I mean, it was so funny. Me and Will were discussing the other day, and he's like, he's not going to use the portal because I would want Dabo to be the next coach if he would use the portal. And Will was like, he's not going to use the portal. I'm like, well, he's going to have to use the portal.
Yes, he is
like,
going
if he
to
doesn't,
use the transfer portal.
He's not going to ever get to a national title again.
I understand. I can almost respect in some regards his protection of their culture, and this is the way they do things, and we lean on high school recruiting and all that, but we don't want this to get out of hand. And he's maintained a really good team, not up to their standards, but a good team the last couple of years without touching the transfer portal at all. Really, the only guy that they brought in was Hunter Johnson from Northwestern, just as an emergency quarterback.
Yeah, and he was already on the team.
Yeah, and he was already there before. So I don't see, he didn't see that the same way, and I get it. They are going to have to make moves in the portal. But Mike Loxley, no.
It was insane.
Yeah, so Kalen DeBoer, I also think that, again, that he kind of approaches things in a certain way that will fit in with Alabama. And what's going to be interesting, that we can only read the tea leaves and we can only look at the results of the recruiting going forward. And we know Alabama was a giant before Nick Sabin, but they were an 8-4 giant for much of 30 years between Bear Bryant and Nick Sabin. They were a giant historically, but outside of Gene Stallings winning one national championship in 1992, that was the lone year. And as you well know, the rest of the time they were usually good, top 20 good. And then they had some real rough go right before Sabin. So we'll see if recruits look at Alabama as being Sabin. Was Sabin Alabama, and we no longer look at Alabama the same, or Alabama's Alabama, and Kalen DeBoer is a reasonable replacement as another top 10 coach. So there's just going to be a blip on the radar and not much.
I think it's about starting out fast. You know, you talk about Wisconsin. We know Wisconsin's not Alabama, but like Barry Alvarez and then the coaches after them maintained the success, and it didn't trail off. And then once Paul Chryst started to, they got rid of him because they want to win. They want to continue to be good, not elite, but good. And I think like if Kalen DeBoer starts out and he at least goes 10-2, 11-1, and then he just continues to do that, it might not be Sabin. It might not just be insanely great like Nick Saban. But as long as you're not going, like if he doesn't go 7-5 next year, 8-4, I believe that, you know, that will be good for Kalen DeBoer to continue to at least have Alabama toward the top of the SEC, still toward the top of the sport. You just can't have a decline, because then people will be like, I don't want to go there when I can go to Georgia, or I can go to some of these other schools that are winning more right now. And Saban's not there anymore, and they're kind of declining a little bit. Kind of like how Clemson is, but Dabo's still getting really good players, but it's got to use the portal. That's why they're not winning as much, and I don't think he's going to win again. But gist of it, I'm happy they got Kalen DeBoer. I'm happy for him that he went from Indiana's offensive coordinator to now he's the head coach at Alabama football. I'm happy for that. Two of my favorite teams. Kalen DeBoer, I hope he has just as much success, if not more, at Alabama than he did at Indiana and Washington. But I hope you have a great rest of the show, Mark. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more great discussions about this hire and some of the other candidates. It's crazy, but college football just keeps on rolling on, and that's why you got the voice of college football here to discuss it. Everybody like and subscribe. Appreciate you for having me on, Mark.
Thank you for getting us kicked off, Jeffrey. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, Jeffrey makes a good point about the ascension of Kalen DeBoer's career in just a few years. Although, if you start to cycle through the great coaches in college football, and when they got that first amazing job, that first big job, you're going to see a pretty good smattering of, okay, well, this guy went up level, and this is a exercise for another time. And then others had a pretty quick ascendancy from somewhere obscure to, okay, did a really nice job, and within 1 year got another job, and within 1 or 2 years, boom, another job, and boop, 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 and they take off. All right, let's keep it rolling here at the Voice of College Football. We got Jackson on the line. Jackson, how you doing, and how do you feel about this hire?
I think it's a great hire. I mean, I know that there's some people that I've been talking to today where they're like, not too happy about this hire, but they haven't seen Kalen DeBoer's record. To those that are not too happy about DeBoer's record, they need to look at his record for Washington, Fresno State, and Sioux Falls. I mean, terrific record. I mean, there's a reason why Alabama was looking for Ryan Grubb. And now they're getting Kalen DeBoer. But the question is, does Ryan Grubb go with Kalen DeBoer to Alabama, or is he the next head coach at Washington?
Yeah, I was going to go in that direction at some point as well. Yeah, can't really answer that question. I would think that if he's offered the Washington job, I would think that he's going to stay and take a major coaching job. It's a top 15 to 20 job in the country.
Yeah, I mean, it would be tremendous if they go with him. And I know that there were rumors that I read earlier today that Washington was looking at Cliff Kingsbury. I wouldn't if I were Washington. You don't want another Jimmy Lake situation. Because, I mean, Cliff Kingsbury, hell of an offensive coordinator, but a disastrous head coach. He proved that at Texas Tech, and he proved that at the Cardinals. And Mark, would it be okay if I showed a stat of Kalen DeBoer on how he is as an underdog?
Absolutely.
This is from Brett McMurphy from the Action Network, and it says that Alabama is a 2.5 underdog, but that's way too early. But the important part is DeBoer is 7-3 straight up as an underdog, the best winning percentage as an underdog of any coach in college football since 1990 via Evan H. Abrams.
Huh. Well, off the top of my head, I know that Urban Meyer was 7-0 at Ohio State as an underdog. So I don't know what he did at Florida. So I don't know how far they're going back on that. But anyway, I'm not going to get into statistics about that. It's just impressive. Yes. 7-3 is an underdog, the best since 1990. Okay. Again, I would like to sort through that at another date. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tremendous what he can do at Alabama. I love the hire, which, I mean, I had like relatives asking me, who do you think it's going to be? Lane Kiffin or Steve Sark or Caleb? I told him, look, it's probably going to be either Lane or DeBoer. But if I were Alabama, I would go DeBoer because, because you get a fresh start. You can't automatically just go with the Sabin assistants because, oh, well, we love the good old days. That was our mistake in the 80s. We were so into nostalgia by getting the Bear Bryant assistants, the former Bear Bryant players. That hurt us right there. But now I've got a pretty good feeling about the next 2 to 3 years. I think it's going to be great with DeBoer, and I can't wait to see if Jalen Milroe is staying for 2024. I can't wait to see how he develops Milroe. Because, I mean, I love what he did with Penix. Not saying Milroe is going to be he's nowhere near Michael Penix. Don't get me wrong. But I just love what he's going to be able to do with Milroe if he does stay in Tuscaloosa.
He is not near Michael Penix as a precisioned passer. However, he is far superior as a runner. And there were a lot of people not necessarily predicting Lamar Jackson, let's say, and I'm taking it to the next level to be an NFL quarterback, and he's turned out to be an MVP. So the one similarity is that they're both amazing deep ball throwers. So he'll still, I was wondering what the Grubb DeBoer offense was going to look like in Washington with Will Rogers at quarterback. So I won't get to see that. We won't get to see that unless, of course, Grubb stays at Washington with Will Rogers as quarterback, because he is a really good player, but much more limited than Michael Penix. But taking it back to Alabama, yeah, that's the one similarity, is that Jalen Milroe just doesn't have a rocket launcher. He is precise downfield, and he is accurate downfield. There were some metrics that showed him to be the most accurate deep ball thrower in college football this year. So I would think a lot of things that Kalen DeBoer is going to be structuring an offense that in some ways is much different than Michael Penix, but in terms of taking deep shots and setting up for deep shots, I would think it's going to be extremely similar to what he did with Penix.
That's true. And I know that there are some people just saying that, oh, well, Kalen DeBoer could beat Michigan at Washington. But here's the thing, though. I think he'll have an easier time winning at, say, an Alabama, like, say, win a national title, like 2-3 national titles they could at, like, Washington. I mean, don't know that's going to happen, but we'll wait and see. But it's very exciting to see what the Kalen DeBoer era is going to bring in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, well, there's no question that he's got a much better shot at winning national championships at Alabama than he does at Washington. And all due respect to Washington, they're moving into what could be the best conference, certainly the second best conference. And they just went to a national championship game. However, let's just face facts. They don't have the recruiting footprint. And now Alabama, you could argue, DeBoer is going to have to face a more difficult schedule, but if he can get them to the playoffs, it's going to take elite talent to win in a 12-team playoff, and he's going to have that opportunity to maintain this roster and build on it and continue the Sabin Alabama legacy.
Yeah, it's going to be. I'm looking forward to see what happens, because I know Alabama is going to be very happy eventually. Some of the naysayers, they're not too happy about it. But I read something for Josh Pate today where he said, I get the sense who believed DeBoer wouldn't work at Alabama also thought Scott Frost would be a Grand Slam hire at Nebraska.
Yeah, I don't know.
That kind of gave me a big laugh today. And before I go, I'd like to mention, if you love top-notch college football information, watch parties, exclusive live streams, and betting advice in all college football, go to patreon.com/MarkRogersTV or become a YouTube member of the Voice of College Football.
Well, thank you, Jackson. We appreciate you being here, sir. You're always right here with us. And we appreciate the college football knowledge. Some of the facts and trends you bring to the table are top notch.
Well, thank you, Mark. And it's always an honor talking with you, man. And have an awesome rest of the show, man.
Thank you, Jackson. I appreciate it. Now let's talk before we get to Adam here real quick. Let me just make a comment about, hiring and the criticism of hires and so forth. I would say over the course of a zillion years that I've been watching college football, and more recently in the last 30 that I've been covering college football, more officially at other places, but that rarely do I come away from a hire and say, that was a terrible hire. They're going to regret it. That was atrocious, because most of the time we're dealing with large universities with major programs, and they are selecting among a number of capable candidates, and they make a reasonable hire, including Scott Frost at Nebraska. Scott Frost at Nebraska did everything at Oregon and UCF, and because of his ties to the university as an alum and a champion, that I would love to have the well-documented verification from anybody out there that they did not approve of that hire. I didn't rubber stamp it as a home run grand slam hire for sure, because he had not won in major college football as a head coach. He had not won in the Big Ten. He had not had that kind of job. And the stint at UCF was impressive beyond belief, but it was also very, very temporary. So, yes, if anybody can provide the proof that they said that Scott Frost was going to be a bust at Nebraska, more power to them, and I would like to see that. And I'm not saying that in a condescending way. I just don't know of anybody who said that Scott Frost would not achieve at Nebraska, and he just seemed like the obvious hire. He was the Harbaugh hire of Nebraska, other than he didn't go to San Francisco or an NFL job and perform to the degree of Harbaugh. But those have turned out, obviously, to be completely separate hiring decisions and conclusions, although 3 years ago at this point, I had Michigan fans and other college football fans basically making that comparison between Frost's tenure at Nebraska and Harbaugh at Michigan, which I said at the time, being the Harbaugh apologist that I've had to be, because I speak the truth and common sense, to say that's ridiculous. It's not even close. All right, back to Sabin, DeBoer, Alabama, and we got Adam on the line. Adam, what's going on tonight? Unfortunately, we can't hear you, Adam.
Hey, Mark, how are you? Can you hear me?
We got you.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. Well, it's sure been a crazy 10 days. We lose the Rose Bowl and Sabin retires. And one of the things I was thinking is that, look, this retirement was so sudden, and it placed Alabama in a really difficult position, given that they're in the middle of the recruiting season, to really hire somebody very quickly. So I'm wondering, why didn't Sabin agree to coach one more year? Give Alabama the time to go through an extended search, a thoughtful search, instead of putting them in this position, because what it yielded was a coach from Washington, DeBoer, who certainly has a fantastic record and is a great coach. But a lot of his wins come from Sioux Falls, and I think it's NI8, like Division II school, yeah.
Well, it's not a Division II. It's below Division III.
It's below Division III.
Division IV. Yes.
Right. So his track record is, he was good at Fresno State. He was good at Washington. But his Washington defense was 94th in the country. And I can't help but think, as far as Sabin goes, look, if you're going to retire so suddenly, have a transition where you say you're going to coach for one more year so you can have an extended search, and not put Greg Byrne in the position of having to do this so quickly, whereby, yes, you get a good hire in DeBoer, but that's not the best Alabama could have done. They could have gotten Kiffin. They could have gotten a better coach. And I think that Sabin would have been more thoughtful if he planned this, if he planned his exit out with a little more deliberation and gave Alabama more time. Because with DeBoer, I think we're going to lose 3 to 4 games per year. He's unproven in recruiting in the SEC. His track record at Washington, while good, was with poor defenses. And most of his wins come from, Division III school. So I'm not thrilled with this, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
Adam's coming in here with the iron fist, bringing some reality to everybody that thinks that Kalen DeBoer.
I'm a Bama and USC fan. I mean, but I'm disappointed. What are your thoughts?
All right. Well, rarely is there a coach available that has the kind of track record that you're expecting out of them at that level in the current job. If you follow me, if you go to almost any big time coach, they didn't prove that at that level somewhere else. It's not like usually coaches don't move from Texas to Alabama, or from Ohio State to Alabama, or USC to Ohio State. They usually don't make those moves. It's usually a stepping stone kind of process. Now, Brian Kelly moving from Notre Dame to LSU and Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma to USC, I think are completely unprecedented. I cannot come up with a like comparison for those kind of jobs. So you don't usually have a guy of like caliber be able to move into that position. Now, I'm curious about and it's an interesting thought about the whole 1-year plan to give the heads up, to put a plan in place, to coach the final year. I don't know what that would have done to recruiting.
Well, I think that if we believe Sabin, and I have no reason to doubt him, he made this decision a couple of days ago. When he makes that decision, it immediately puts Alabama in a precarious position because they have people on the roster and they have people they're recruiting that all of a sudden are going to be confronted with the fact that Sabin suddenly is gone. And we've already seen Isaiah Bond go into the transfer portal. So what Sabin should have done is say, I'm going to retire, but I'm going to retire at the end of the 2025 season so that there would have been an opportunity for Greg Byrne to conduct a more thorough search and for the players to have a better transition. Instead, he just uprooted the whole thing. And that kind of jolt to a team and to an organization, I think, can be very difficult. And that put Greg Byrne in a position where he's like, I got to hire someone really quickly so we don't lose our current roster or lose recruits. And so that's why we got DeBoer, who I have nothing but positive things to say, but certainly he's not the best we could have done. Lane Kiffin was the best we could have done. Lane Kiffin learned under Sabin. He's building a juggernaut at Mississippi. If we gave him the right money, he's a great recruiter. All right, he relates to young players. You know, when you're replacing Nick Sabin, I would think you want to replace him with someone of a stature that is going to continue the winning tradition of Alabama. And I think that the way Sabin handled it put Byrne in a position where he had to go with somebody quickly, even if it wasn't the best choice. And I think that's why we got DeBoer.
My best recollection, anytime a coach has set up his program to say, this is my final season and I'm leaving, they had somebody in mind, somebody in place. Let's say it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and Lane Kiffin was there. And I'm not meaning the Lane Kiffin of 10 years ago. The Lane Kiffin now was the OC, and they could make that smooth transition. Listening to all the selling points you had for Lane Kiffin, it sounded like the video that I just posted the other day, because I tried to go through the pluses and minuses of all the candidates. And that's where I was with Lane Kiffin. My two negatives was, number one, he's never won a championship. So there's not that championship caliber coach. But then again, that's few and far between. And I don't mean either a national championship necessarily, but he's never won a conference championship. And there are very few candidates that would fit that bill. And then number two, depending on your liking of the look of the hire and the look of the head coach, maybe he says some things that you don't necessarily believe are the best, or will he be able to fulfill the decorum of the Alabama head coach at the place that they would want. But everything else that you just mentioned there relates to the players. Look at how they're killing it in the transfer portal. Players want to come play for him. They understand that he's going to prepare them for the NFL. They just like him as a person. Like you say, relatable. That's the same term I use. Relatable to the players. He's building a juggernaut at Ole Miss. You got to give him a ton of credit for there. It's not an easy place to win. And he's won 10 or 11 games 2 of the last 3 years. And he's an offensive mind. Usually, I think the trend has become hire an offensive guy as the head coach. Let him go find his mastermind to be the DC, and you would have that in place. Now, of course, they do with Kalen DeBoer as well. And again, your point about ties to the SEC. He's coached at Tennessee, Ole Miss. He was at Bama. He's got a ton of SEC experience. But we have seen coaches go into the SEC and be successful that did not have SEC experience.
Yeah, sure. And the last thing I'll say is, I saw a couple of comments in the chat. Lane is building a juggernaut at Ole Miss because he's shoring up the defense and he's raiding the transfer portal, and Ole Miss is going to be a very serious contender. And my only point is that when you have the greatest coach in college football history who suddenly resigns, that's not the way to handle it, because it's going to be such a shock to the organization and the players, including the recruits, that you have to have a smoother and more lengthy transition. So Sabin should have said, I'm going to coach one more year, put Greg Byrne in a position to have time to search, to negotiate. Instead, he put Alabama into a corner where they had to hire somebody within 72 hours. And so, yes, they got a good hire. But do I think they could have gotten a better hire? Yes. And when you consider Kiffin's connections to the SEC, his recruiting, his coaching ability, he would have been the best choice. And I think Sabin should have given them an opportunity to explore that over the long term rather than such short term.
But Adam, of course, this is how it goes in these situations. Like, this is not an anomaly. These administrations have to deal with a firing or a resignation or a retirement like that. And these are usually fire drills trying to get that spot filled. So everybody has to deal with that.
Right, but this is an anomalous situation. It's not your ordinary situation. It's kind of like Bear Bryant leaving.
Sure.
You're dealing with the best coach ever leaving, and it's going to be traumatic to the players. It's going to cause roster turnover. Coaches on the staff are not going to know if their jobs are secure. Recruits are going to wonder if they should decommit. So why not say, I'm coaching for one more year, and we're going to have a robust search that I'll participate in so you smooth that transition. I think we would have gotten a better coach, and I think that next year what we're going to see is some growing pains that may not have had to be experienced if we had done it in a more thoughtful way. But thanks, Mark, as always, for taking my call and for a great show. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Good to hear from a thoughtful Alabama fan, because he's got some skin in the game. He is looking out for his team, his program, and I pushed back on a few points, but he definitely has some valid points there that it could have been better orchestrated. And again, I do think, although I'm not coming up with great examples, the best two examples I'm coming up with of legendary coaches that have moved on and given some kind of leeway to somebody else, well, they had somebody right there that was the prized pupil that they moved right into the spot. And I'm meaning Urban Meyer to Ryan Day. That transition, well, he's already the OC. And I'm thinking Bob Stoops right into Lincoln Riley. Both situations have obviously worked out well, regardless of what you think as an Oklahoma or Ohio State fan about Day and about Lincoln Riley. They did really good jobs to an extent. So that worked out, but they had the guy right there in play. We'd have to do an exhaustive, which we will at some point. Shoot, I was, when all this came down, I posted a video with Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama. And of course, I knew, okay, I'm going to get this conversation in, and I want to really focus on DeBoer and Kiffin because I thought it was down to those two. Stephen thought it was down to those two. I thought DeBoer was in the running at the time. So this is about 11 this morning. I'm thinking, okay, we're going to get a decision today, but I want to get it in front of this, and I want to narrow down the final 2 or 3 candidates because I had just seen the notice come in about Sark. And then I thought, okay, well, let's have a conversation. And I think it's DeBoer or Norvell at the time is what I thought. And then Norvell had just, while we were talking, had just said, I'm staying at Florida State. He got the big contract extension. And Steven said, well, actually, Kalen DeBoer, it's Kalen DeBoer, which I already knew, but he brought Kiffin back into the mix saying, Kiffin still has his supporters at Alabama, and there is still some push within the inner circle there to go after Lane Kiffin. So he thought DeBoer was the odds-on favorite, but Kiffin was the default and the possible winner of the sweepstakes, and that the wild cards were definitely Tommy Rees and Mike Locksley. I was shocked. I got to say, I was shocked. I get and we see this all over the place when there's a big job available and somebody has entered that program and they've done a nice job. And by all accounts, did Tommy Rees do a nice job? Yeah, he did a nice job. I'm not going to say he did a remarkable job. Alabama did not have a top 5 offense, a top 10 offense, a top 15 offense. They had their struggles, but it was understandable. And he figured out how to work with Jalen Milroe. And they made a decision about the quarterback situation after the South Florida game, went with Milroe. And they did exactly what I figured a Sabin team would do. And how much credit goes to Tommy Rees there. But I knew that they would figure out, we've got this player. He's a fairly unique player. He has his limitations, but man, he's got his upside and the things that he does well. We are going to limit the playbook to, I don't know, 70%, 60%, whatever. We're eliminating this, and not necessarily eliminating these plays, but these concepts and these approaches, like reading a defense, progressions, out the door, throw to this guy in the flat, throw a bomb, run. That's what we're going to do, and we'll be fine. And we're going to run the ball a little bit more with the running backs, and we're going to play great defense. And that's who we are, and that's what we've been in the past. That's what we're going to be this year. So how much Tommy Rees had to do with that? Probably something, if he got a push within the program and within the locker room. So I think what the players have to say is important. I think that their input is important. They certainly had something to say about the Marcus Freeman hire at Notre Dame. They love Marcus Freeman. They loved him as a defensive coordinator. But let's understand that while it seems like a feel-good story that, oh, the players supported this coach and they wanted him and they love him and they embraced him and they so much appreciate what he did, that's all well and good, but they're not the people as 17 to 22-year-olds that should be making corporate decisions about who's the best person to run a football operation. So let's understand the limitations of 20-year-olds to influence adults to make wise hiring decisions, because I think that gets overplayed. Well, the players just loved him and they supported him and they just put in a good word for him. And, you know, because he bonded with the players and related to the players, that was the difference. And no, you don't make decisions like that. If you're adults running a corporation, you're basically running a major business as a football program at a place like Alabama. So, yeah, we want to hear from the players. It would be interesting to hear some things from the players. Now, if that's a situation where somebody is of the ilk of a Marcus Freeman who is showing in other areas he is prepared for the next step and the next job, and then to supplement that evaluation, that interview with the response of the players and the input of the players, that's a great benefit. That's a great supplement to your evaluation, but you don't go off of that. So I'm sure Tommy Rees got some play in the locker room, and that's to his credit that he won over the team, won over the players, but you don't make a football hiring job as a head coach at any school, really. I don't care if this is Georgia Southern. You don't hire a head coach because the players love him. All right, let's go to Will. Will, what's going on?
Mark, I was getting a kick out of that. That's what all the Marcus detractors were saying when he got fired. That like, you don't make a decision just based off the players. That was funny. But
no, I wasn't targeting him. I was.
No, I know, but it was. I just thought it was funny
that he put himself in a position. Yeah. In all the other ways. And that's great to supplement that with the knowledge that, oh yeah, okay, the players love him and they relate to him and all that. That's awesome. But yeah, I just think that's probably where all that came from concerning Tommy Rees. And that's great. That's to his credit, but you don't hire a football coach based on what a bunch of 22-year-olds say.
I think the first big thing for DeBoer, if he could succeed, is if he gets the right defensive coordinator in there for Alabama.
That is crucial.
I know, like, I was watching an Alabama podcast before you went live, and they really wanted their cornerbacks coach just because he's such a good recruiter to be the defensive coordinator, but that doesn't always work. I mean, so.
Yeah, who is that? I know
Robinson something. Robinson.
Okay. Anyway, I'll find him just because I like to know who everyone is. And when I don't remember somebody, that bothers me.
But I don't know. What do you have went? DeBoer over Lane? That was a tough decision. That's a tough decision. I know the boosters don't like Lane because of the weird stuff he says, but
Travaris Robinson. He's had
Yeah.
some decent jobs. Okay. Yeah, I believe he was at Auburn. Anyway, I think there's something to that. I think we are less. It's strange because in this society, in some ways, we're more uptight about that stuff. In other ways, we have people saying all sorts of stuff that's just off the deep end that I don't even think should be. So, yeah, don't get me started on that end of it. But when it comes to what Lane Kiffin has to say, I find it harmless. I can't really think of anything that I've heard him say that I thought this is damaging. I've thought a few things that he's said is stupid. Like when he went after Jimbo Fisher, when Jimbo, and Jimbo looks like a knucklehead. So part of this is actually
Jimbo's an easy target for sure.
Yes, he's an easy target. Exactly. Part of the problem is not everyone listens to, and we're emotional people, and we don't usually listen to what people have to say. We look at how they present the information. And so when Sabin and Jimbo have a back and forth, Sabin looks calm and controlled and on point. And Jimbo had a lot of good things to say, but hey, and it's like, oh my
man,
and that's what people see, and that's what they equate. And so then Lane Kiffin, it's funny because then Lane Kiffin makes all sorts of whiny complaints about what they don't have at Ole Miss, and we don't have this, and that. Well, you've got more than like 80% of the country. So do you expect all those coaches to whine and say we don't have what they have at Ole Miss? I'm sure you have more than what they have at Vanderbilt, and who knows, however many stops in the SEC. So I just think some of those kind of things, they're harmless, but they're also pointless. And at one point, I thought he had matured quite a bit, but then I think his maturation has stopped at a certain point. That's just going to be who he is.
Yeah, because my dad could not stand him when he was at SC. He's like, oh, I hate this guy. And I remember the day after when the tarmac, he's like, yes, he's gone, get him out.
I just didn't understand why he got all these great jobs. I just was like, okay, well, what did he do? It went, I get it confused. Tennessee, Raiders, USC.
Raiders first, right? Raiders, then Tennessee, then USC.
Oh man, he was the Raiders head coach at like 29.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we could go into the way the Raiders were run at that time was.
I remember they told Jamarcus Russell to go study this tape that they gave him. And then he's like, yeah, I studied the tape, but the tape was empty. There's nothing on it. So, yeah. Yeah, that was a whole mess.
Yeah. So, are you good with DeBoer? Would you have gone?
I like DeBoer. He's very likable, so I hope he does well. But he's not that experienced, but he won everywhere, so that definitely means a lot.
Yeah, there's only a few guys walking around that have. Of course, nobody's got Sabin's resume, but there's only a few guys that have these just super, super impressive resumes that people are going to be wowed over. And one of them they don't want because it's Dabo and because he's had 3 bad seasons in a row.
No, Mark, as the carousel continues, I think the first call that Washington has to make is to Jed Fish. They have to try to get Jed Fish.
Yes, that's a great call. You're way ahead of me on that one because I hadn't even gone in that direction, even though I thought as soon as I heard this, I was like, okay, I got to set up a live stream. And then I had all these issues with thumbnails. And anyway, so I'm setting up this live stream and then I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to have to counter with, okay, where do we go with Washington? And then I thought nobody's going to talk about that. So I'm not even going to think about it. But that is the call right there. Yes.
Especially. Yeah, but it'll be interesting to see where Tommy goes. I don't know if he's going to be an NFL quarterbacks coach or he's going to go somewhere else, maybe be an analyst under Mike Denbrock for a year. At Notre Dame, it'll be interesting to see where Tommy goes.
Yeah, I don't know. And again, if you just simply look at the numbers, I'm not seeing where he's really done much, but
Yeah,
I don't
I
want to
agree.
knock on him at the same time because there are limitations but he's not exactly tearing it up.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't have anything personal against Reese, and I think a lot of people complained about his quarterback recruiting, but people said that Kelly put handcuffs on him, like, we have to get someone, so don't go after the big fish. I don't know how much of that's true or not true, but he did go get Buckner, he did get Carr and Minchie, so I don't know.
You've gone from how long was Reese there?
2017, he was hired as the quarterback's coach after the disastrous 2016 season.
Yes, and when Kelly was forced pretty much to overhaul the whole thing. Yeah.
So and then I believe he became the coordinator in 2020 after Chip Long left to go.
Okay, Chip Long. Okay, that's right. And so now we've gone from Long to Reese to
Parker,
Jared Parker, and now Denbrock.
So it's a little circle because Denbrock was the coordinator in 20. I mean, it was him and Sanford Jr. were like calling plays in 2016, which made it messy. I mean, he had full autonomy in 2015 when the offense was good. And then 2016, Kelly gave more say to Sanford, and that was what messed it all up. So now we're back to Denbrock.
We kind of talked about Marcus Freeman and his ability to lead a huge program. This is another part of it. What the selection of his coordinators and how successful.
We've got two good ones now. So that makes me much excited for the upcoming season.
Yes, Notre Dame in the 12-team playoff with one less game played than a bunch of other teams in the playoff.
Hey, if you think about it, the extra game, because the extra game would make Notre Dame play the same amount going into playing the top 4 teams. So it makes up for it because the one extra game,
if they earned that top 4 type status.
Yeah.
I just think this is going to be difficult. I'm surprised that there hasn't been more talk about the regular season and limiting games. Somebody may have to play a 17-game season.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's true. That's a lot of games.
Adding that up correctly, if you play a conference championship game, that's 13. And if you don't get a bye, you're playing 4 games.
Yeah. That's a lot of games.
That's why I've said don't be surprised if somebody opts out of a playoff.
It would be so sad for college football if that happens. Opting out of the playoff game. I mean, Malik Murphy did it, but I mean that's kind of you can kind of give him the pass because
he was protecting his future. Well, those guys would be as well, but his next move,
But do you think that would you still pick Alabama to make the playoff right now, even with? I mean, I guess you have to see what happens, but with how many players stay, who transfers out.
So we've got a 12-team playoff. We've got a group of 5. We've got an ACC champ. We got a Big 12 champ. So there's 3 spots gone. We got 9 left. And I'm thinking the Big 10 and the SEC probably get 3 for sure. And maybe a second place ACC or Big 12, maybe. But if those leagues size up the way they did this last year, they won't even get a second place team. And so it could be as many as 4. Yeah, they're going to the playoffs.
I mean, I know Ole Miss, Texas, and Georgia are all also probably most likely going to make the playoff as well.
Yeah, but let's also understand, Will, one of my favorite stats in all of sports, probably because I came up with it, is the 3-game increase or decrease in wins. I did that math the other day. It was 29 2 years ago. The number this year is 25. So
Mm.
25 Power 5 teams out of, I think, 69. So about close to 40%, something in that range, 40%. So I've got our buddy Joey Foster on last night after we wrapped up here. I flipped to the Big 12 show, and they're running through everyone. And I totally get this. I'm not dissing on Joey, of course, but they pretty much running through the Big 12 thinking everybody's going to pretty much stay the same. They're
Well,
not.
yeah.
I don't know.
Especially in the Big 12, especially in that volatile
Yes.
conference.
8 of the 14 from last year either went up or down by 3 games. So there's going to be upheaval.
For sure.
So I don't know where it's going to be. It's up to me to try to figure that out between now and then, but I don't know.
I mean, of course, I hope Notre Dame goes up to 12-0, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Notre Dame could be one. They go to 12-0.
Ohio State will probably not go down. They'll probably go undefeated with how many players are coming back. Well, they better. I mean, go 12-0. I mean,
it's tough to go undefeated.
Yeah,
that is tough. We did have 3 this year. I guess we did have 3. That would be the most since 2019.
2019, LSU, Clemson, Bama. No, not Bama. LSU, Clemson.
You're forgetting
Ohio
the most
State.
important. Yes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. My brain went. I don't know why I thought Bama lost. They lost to Auburn as well. They went 10-2.
I will say that the thing that I was the most wrong about this season. Well, Art KW is telling us that Ohio State is going to be Steve Belisari bad 7-5 from the year 2001.
No, I can't see that happening.
Where was I headed with this? I forget now what we were talking about. That distracted me. Seeing Ohio State and 7-5 in the same sentence completely distracted me.
I mean, that Autzen game's really the only game that I could see Ohio State.
Well, they are playing Michigan.
I know. Well, that's true, but Michigan. I mean, you have to beat Michigan this year. If he doesn't beat Michigan and doesn't win the championship, Ryan Day could be gone.
Yeah, he probably should be gone. Although it would be very odd, very strange, and has never happened in college football. If he goes 11-1 and loses to Michigan and loses his job, that's never happened. That nothing close to that has ever happened.
Yeah.
Like I was trying to point this out to our buddy Cam Underwood the other night on the Miami show because he was talking about the pressure of Sabin's replacement, and that he said, what if this guy comes in and he goes 10-2, 10-2, 10-2 the next 3 years? Well, my first point was this 12-team playoff changes the evaluation completely. If you become a 10-2 coach, but you can get in and you regularly outplay your regular season performance and go deep in the playoffs and go to national championship games, then all's forgiven. You know, we lost to Tennessee in October. All's forgiven. That's fine. But if you become the Ryan Day of losing to Michigan, but you're going 11-1, 11-1, 12-0, 12-0, and you're losing early in the playoffs, not winning playoff games, and you become the Atlanta Braves or Buffalo Bills of college football, then forget that 12-0, forget the 11-1. But I was pointing out to him, Ryan Day in the regular season, I said, no, I don't think there's any more pressure at Alabama than there is at Ohio State. It's kind of tough to judge now because Sabin's been there winning so much for so long, but they ran through coaches in the 2000s and they let coaches sit around at 7-5. But Ryan Day's regular season records are 12-0, 10-2, 11-1, 11-1, minus the COVID year, whatever they were, 5-0 regular season. So, all right, Will, anything else for us?
Well, one thing that I saw that made me smile was that Newt Rockne had a higher winning percentage at Notre Dame than Nick Saban did at Alabama. Still ahead, even after all the winning that Saban's done. So,
And so is that this is bad of me, but was Newt Rockne anywhere else besides?
I'm pretty sure he wasn't, but I will double check. I know that Leahy was at BC.
Yeah, he was at BC very briefly, a
He
couple
was
of years.
At some South Bend military team.
Okay.
But I don't see any record of that.
I was putting together a GOAT argument. I shouldn't give away some of these numbers, but I love this. So I was looking at national championships. Frank Leahy won 4, as you well know. He was at Notre Dame from 41 to 53. So besides just the national championships, I think you need to consider how long somebody was at a school. So Frank Leahy
also went undefeated at BC, and BC claims the title that year too.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then he's got anyway, he's got 4 in 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then Newt Rockne's got 3 in 13 years from 2020, 1918 to 30. And I should have looked at era too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I am not in there is no debate for GOAT status. I am not in that club. I think he's the easy one, and he's the easiest one to defend, and he probably is, but I think it's a probably. I don't think it's just without a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Nope.
All right.
I don't. Okay, well, appreciate it. Have a good night.
You too.
Let's keep it moving. Love to hear from Tide Guy. Tide Guy, what's going on?
Hey, how we doing?
I am doing just fine. This hire, take it away.
You know, I'm happy that we got him. I think he's going to do well. When I started going through the coaches, I had him in top 3. I kind of changed my view. I really thought Kiffin could really help Alabama at this time with the style that he has, knowing that Sabin has an office and Brian, Denny, that he would kind of overlook him, kind of still mentor him a little bit. I thought this would probably be the time to bring in Kiffin because he's got the ego to handle it. But unfortunately, a lot of the higher ups still don't like him talking on Twitter, don't like, all the out of game stuff that he brings. So I am happy that we got Kalen. I really am. I think he's going to come in and I think he will do good. But like I've been posting on Twitter, Alabama fans need to give him time. Yes, we went to the championship this year, or, the playoffs. Yes, we should make the playoffs next year, but he is a new coach. And we have to remember, Nick Saban lost to Louisiana Monroe his first year. And things turned around and look what, so if we do stumble this year and only win, 7, 8 games, give him a chance.
7 or 8. Oh man, that'd be a disaster.
Well, but it's been a disaster before at Alabama when we lost somebody.
Oh, I know.
Saban was 7-7, but it was a whole, or 7-6, and it was a whole different team. I mean, he didn't have what Kalen's going to walk into, but you got to be prepared for the first year that there could be a fall.
All right, folks, I'm just gearing up for this by looking at Bama's schedule. So the loss would be to either Western Kentucky or USF if he's going to pull a Sabin year 1.
Well, we struggled against USF this year. I know it was a rainstorm, and I know we didn't have our starter.
Yeah, you were on the road.
Week 4 is going to tell you where this team is. We play Georgia at home.
Yeah.
So that's going to tell you if we're a playoff team or not. I mean, if we do well against them, even if we lose close, but if they blow the doors off us, that's kind of...
I get your point. I don't completely agree, especially with this 12-team playoff. I think they could get blown out by Georgia and recover and go 10-2.
Well, I hope you're right. I mean, and I said on Twitter that I think realistically we should win no fewer than 9 games this year, even with the coaching change. I give us a 9 game. But I want fans to remember, not everybody remembers when Bear Bryant retired, what happened with Stallings. I mean, bad things do happen. And we got to, as Bama fans, not expect championships every other year like Saban did, because that's not going to happen again in today's world with NIL, with transfer portal, stuff like that. That's going to be impossible almost for a coach to do.
Yes, but with Alabama talent and with everything that's in play for him, yeah, I would think that there's still a pretty high expectation for him to win in this first year.
But how many players are still going to be there? We just lost Bond today. Isaiah Bond, our best receiver.
Yes.
Downs is talking about transferring. That would be a big blow to our defense. And Malachi Moore is now thinking about entering the NFL draft.
Well, that's why you recruit the way you do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we do have talent. I mean, I'm not, even losing them, but that's my worry. And but the other look is, who do we pick up now that,
yes, exactly.
Who's coming over now from Washington?
Exactly. Yeah.
And just to tell Will that, he said Newt Rockne has a better record than Nick Saban. Mike Price never lost a game at Alabama. He might have lost his pants. He might have lost his credit card, but he never lost a game.
And forever his reputation lost.
And forever his reputation.
Or maybe he gained a reputation forever.
I told Will, though, when we hired Kalen today, that it was told that he could not stop at Florida first before coming to Alabama, that he had to take a direct flight.
Yes, quite the scenario there. My goodness.
But I think Kalen will bring in some good coaches. I really do. As far as Robinson goes, I wouldn't mind him being our defensive coordinator. I know he's not really done it before, but he is a strong recruiter. He is a good coach. I think he could fill the DC position really well.
Do you do that with a new head coach, though? Bring in somebody that inexperienced?
Well, the problem is, who else is going to come? I mean, this is kind of late, so coaches have already kind of made their moves. I know there's still some good coaches out there, and we could get. But if it does come down to we promote Robinson, I don't think it's as big a disaster as some people think.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't think anyone knows because he hasn't had the position yet. But I would just think that it's not the wisest choice to take an offensive-minded coach in his first year at a huge upgrade of a job where there's going to be all this attention and pressure on him, and give him a first-time defensive coordinator where he's going to have his hand possibly on that side of the ball more than he would like.
Right. And who knows? Maybe he's already got some coaches in mind. Maybe, I mean, because obviously he's going to bring in somebody. So, I mean, there's some coaches out there that we could still get to be, the defensive coordinator.
Yep.
But the question is, does he bring his offensive coordinator?
Yeah, that would be a big coup.
That's who we want. I mean, no offense to Reese, but we tried to get him last year before we ended up with Reese, so do we bring in his offensive coordinator? And who knows, maybe if we do get his offensive coordinator, and now that we know it's Kalen, does Isaiah Bond say, well, this guy is a offensive friendly coach. Does he not transfer? Because he just entered the transfer portal. It don't mean that he can't come back.
Yeah, so there's some comments in the chat about Grubb, the offensive coordinator, becoming a head coach next season, but I don't know where he's going to be a head coach unless he's a head coach at Washington. And I got to think that they're going to have their sights set higher than that, and that he's going to follow DeBoer to Alabama would be my guess.
Yeah, the only way I can see him becoming a coach would possibly be like if Washington took Arizona's coach, does he go to Arizona?
Yeah.
Who, I don't see him at Washington, but he might be either at that school that Washington takes the coach.
Yeah.
Or the school that Arizona takes the coach, or whoever,
Yeah,
is he
there
number
you go.
2 or number 3 on the list?
Yep, that's a good point. Absolutely. Yeah. Arizona takes I'm just throwing. I'm not going to throw out a school, but a Mountain West coach. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that possibly be where he lands because
Yeah,
it's hard to hire a first-time coach with the experience that he doesn't have that much experience. So you're not going to want to put him on Washington, a team like that, but a lower Power 5 or, one of the upper G5s, that's where I think he would go first.
All right, Tide Guy, giving the thumbs up to Kalen DeBoer. I'm right there with you.
You have a great day.
Thank you, Tide Guy. Appreciate you
right.
being here.
Bye.
It's our guy, Tide Guy. Terrence, thank you so much. Got to be the hardest working man on YouTube. I'm working on that this year. That's probably my number one goal. I've got so many goals this year. It's unbelievable, but probably too many because you're supposed to take like one thing at a time. Like if you say, I need to drink more water, then you need to like focus on just that, just to add that. I tend to try to add like 17 things at once. And I'm not exaggerating, like 17 things at once and say, I can do all these. I can do this starting tomorrow. I can do this starting tomorrow. I can do that. No, but I continue to try to do it. So that is on the goal list, is to not be the hardest working man. That's the last thing I want to be. I don't want to be the hardest working man on YouTube. I want to be a moderately working man on YouTube. It's all about production. It's all about production, but I appreciate the sentiment, Terrence, and that you were here for it, even though Terrence gives me hell sometimes in these comment sections. All right, we got DeReal on the line. DeReal, what's going on?
Oh, nothing much, Mark. How about you?
I am doing well, just processing Kalen DeBoer to Alabama, although I thought it was a possibility. I didn't, the more the other guys took themselves off the list, then I was not surprised by this selection.
I agree. I was surprised Dan Lanning was their first guy that they really went after hard.
I am too.
Well, why do you say that?
Because Dan Lanning, on the plus side, is young, aggressive, bright, all those things. Seems like he's going to be a star, but he's not won a championship. He's not his team this year. Not that whoever's called upon, and it's Kalen DeBoer, is going to have to elevate this program. You pretty much just need to maintain. But there are other guys. I think it speaks volumes when somebody can be Mike Norvell and resurrect a program and build it. That means they're sharp. That means that they understand how to change culture, how to change people's mindset, how to restructure things, to kick some people in the tail. So Mike Norvell was pretty much number one, bypassing Kirby Smart, Dabo Sweeney. Mike Norvell was my number one choice. And then I think I had Lanning. I made some kind of order, but yeah, so I think that Lanning would have been a good choice, but I'm not completely sold on him. I would like to see a little bit more.
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of confused why they went with Kalen DeBoer. I mean, to me, this could be just an outlier type season for Kalen DeBoer. Now, I know his record has always been great, but at this level of football, it's just different, and I would like to see him repeated over multiple recruiting cycles. Because honestly, this year, I don't think Washington was one of the 5, maybe even 6 or 7 best teams in the country. I think a lot of good breaks happened for them to make the national championship game.
Well, I would agree with that. I don't think that this is some kind of powerhouse. I think that this actually might be, I've never thought of this until right this second when you said that. They're probably the worst team to play in a national championship game.
Well, I would throw in TCU from last year. They were.
I bypassed the obvious. Okay, I'll put them at number 2 on that list. Yeah.
Right. And Mark, I love the Michigan fans. I'm just their number one voice. If you ask all of them, I'm sure.
Should be. You keep them on their toes.
And, you uploaded a video saying, was this Michigan team one of the greatest teams of all time? And when you upload that video, I was actually thinking the complete opposite direction. This might be one of the worst national championship teams in a long time. Just think about their wins against the elite competition. They didn't have that really impressive standout win that most national championship teams do.
Okay, well, that's an interesting way to slice it, because I'd have to review teams, but this Washington win. So you're talking about taking a top 5 team in the country and just really laying the wood to them at least one time during the season. That they did not do that. They didn't do it against Ohio State, Penn State, Alabama. Gotcha.
Right. And also, if we were to rank all the teams this century, okay?
Yes.
I think this Alabama team is the worst Alabama team since 2007. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And this Michigan team barely beat them. I mean, just barely beat them. We changed 1 or 2 plays, and Alabama could win this game by double digits. So I would automatically start by putting every single Alabama team from 2008 to 2022 ahead of this Michigan team. That's where I would start.
Man,
seriously,
you have increased your friends list. I think it's growing even further now. So I don't know if you saw this conversation, and I'm guessing that you were on the line sometime before this conversation I had with Mike Forth the other night. I finally convinced him that there was validity in that, because he said these people that say that Alabama had the worst team that it's had since Sabin started his first year, that's ridiculous. And I said, well, I've been saying the same thing all season, but I also picked them to go to the national championship game. That's what's remarkable about what he built at Alabama. And then we started through it, and I started to explain the running back position, the wide receivers position, the quarterback position, some of the close calls versus what have they been every year other than this season. And, they had a couple other seasons. They weren't vintage Bama, but the player depth and roster and star power on those teams was incredible. That I think I got him around to the thought that, yeah, it's not a ridiculous argument to make that this was Nick Saban's worst team since 2007.
Okay, so that's like what? 15 teams right there, Mark? Which is crazy, but
you're automatically taking one result and expanding that to be everything, escalating that to be everything, since they played one close game, Michigan-Bama, that Michigan's only a tiny bit. And
well, they also did that to Ohio State and somewhat to Penn State as well. I would argue those are probably the first, second, and fourth best team they played.
Yes.
Was those 3 teams. And none of those games that I thought, wow, this Michigan team is just so much significantly better. Now, I think they almost hit that threshold in Penn State, but I don't think they can quite hit that threshold.
Controlled the game. It would have been nice if Penn State had if they could have thrown the ball 12 yards downfield, then it might have been a completely different game. But Penn State matched them defensively and in the running game. Yes.
I mean, if you're in a 1-score game in the fourth quarter, I understand Michigan was game control, was very dominant. But if you're in a fourth quarter and it's a 1-score game, to me, that's not domination at all. And we're not talking the first play of the fourth quarter. We're talking deep into the fourth quarter. Yes. Penn State could have won that game.
Yeah. If James Franklin wasn't a moron and didn't go for it on 4th and whatever it was at his own 25-yard line, when it was, anyways, it was a 1-score game. So, yes, it's tough to debate anything that you're rolling out there, but I'm not going to say just because this was the worst Alabama team and because Michigan barely beat them, that's a good starting point to the case. Definitely, that's where you start, but I don't think that's all there is.
I get that, but I think it's a data point that can be used. Now, I'm sure if we went individual years, we probably could pick out 1 or 2 teams, but I don't think it's like 12 or the 13 teams we would have to take off the board. I'll put it this way. I think it's more than 10 teams are better than this Michigan team.
Okay.
And then we got to throw 2021 Georgia in there, Mark, okay?
Yes.
I mean, 2021 Georgia, I've heard, has got the
Well-
greatest defense of all time.
I'm agreeing with you, but I don't think it's a slam dunk. And I do think that Michigan fans do have a reasonable debate to say we went 15-0 as a national champion. There's only how many teams that have ever done that? Georgia did it, LSU did it, Clemson did it. That's it. We're only one of 4. So that's the argument that they're taking.
I understand, Mark, but is this the NFL?
No.
Okay, so record really doesn't matter. Listen, I'm not a you are what your record says you are type guy, okay? And I think with the expanded playoff, we're going to have to get away from this mindset. Let's be honest. The Big Ten this year was down further than most years, in my opinion. The Big Ten West was horrendous. Their 4th best team was Iowa. Their 5th best team was what, Maryland or Rutgers? A top 40 or 50 team?
Yeah, maybe Maryland was better than Iowa. Who knows? But yeah.
I mean, I'm not impressed if you win 42-3 against all these teams. I'm just not impressed with that.
But DeReal, for as good as your argument is, in some ways, hardly anyone plays that deep of a schedule. Once you get to that 5th, 6th game, most difficult game on the schedule, it typically is pretty weak for most teams across the country.
Well, right. That's why I'm arguing at the beginning of this conversation we should look at the top line games. But then we kind of went down that route of saying, well, they didn't. We need to look at the whole body of work. So that's why I went to the whole
While
body
you're
of work.
talking, I'm grabbing Alabama's season by season because I want to see their dominant wins against really good competition.
I imagine most years they would have it. Now, I'm sure you could find individual years, and I haven't done all the research or most of the research to figure out, but just remembering those elite Alabama teams, those SEC championship teams or games, I mean, there were some pretty impressive Alabama teams, Mark. I mean, Kalen DeBoer's got a whole lot he's got to do. And, Mark, one of my biggest concerns for Kalen DeBoer is I don't think he's really established an identity. And I'm kind of worried that he might fall into the trap post-Bear Bryant coaches did, where they were just following in his shadow.
I don't think that they had attempted to follow in his shadow. That was not their intent. They did their best. They just weren't up to the challenge. And an earlier caller made the comment that Alabama may have been lulled into the, well, Bear Bryant built such a dynasty here, and we need to maintain some kind of connection and hire someone who understands the way Bear did it. And so then they went on this run of Ray Perkins and well, he was the biggest example as the next guy in line. But Alabama didn't do that this time.
Agree. And I know, Mark, Nick Sabin is having his office still at the Alabama's facilities. In my opinion, if you're just going to retire, just leave. Just be clean about it.
Yes.
There's no reason to stay. Don't do what Bob Stoops has done and play half in, half out.
So that's a great point. And I was going to, another caller brought that up and I got sidetracked because I was going to confront that as well. If I'm taking over at Alabama, and I've already heard, as we have the last several days, Nick Saban's going to have this office high above the stadium. He's going to be, if I'm taking over, no. It's my program. Does that mean he's banished from campus? Of course not. He's a legend. I would even welcome having conversations with him, but I don't need any real suggestions unless I ask for them. I'm a big boy. I'm running the Alabama football program. Yeah, I don't need legend hovering over me. No.
Right. And that kind of went with my previous concern because of Kalen DeBoer not having his own identity. If he had a strong personality, a strong leadership role, I think he would be able.
I'm listening.
He would be able to overcome that shadow. But I think it's very hard for Kalen DeBoer, knowing Nick Saban, the greatest coach to ever play the game, is up in the suites looking down at your every single move. I would find that very uncomfortable and worrying to have somebody in that high regard constantly looking down at me and probably judging me throughout every move I make. I would want to establish my own identity, my own brand, and I'm sure the way Kalen DeBoer is going to do it is different than the way Nick Saban would do it. And that's okay to do it two different ways, but I think there could be some conflict there.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I would not want that. When we're talking about somebody that's capable of handling that level of football program, they better be able to handle it by themselves. God forbid Nick Saban, something happens to him tomorrow, he's not going to be there. And that's just could be a bad, it could be done well. And to add to your point is that somebody of Nick Saban's accomplishments and ego, and I say that in a good way, we're not just talking about somebody handing the store to somebody else and they just want to kind of hang out and, have a cup of coffee once in a while. We're talking about strong personalities that believe that their way is the right way and became great in large part to how big their ego is and that they run things the right way. And to have them around and the first thing that they possibly see, and I'm not saying this is happening for sure, but see something done a little bit different on the practice field because I'd like to come to practice once a week and kind of hang out. You don't want that.
Right. And for me, I think that's part of the reason why Oklahoma isn't where they're at is because they just got this Bob Stoops figure just kind of casting his shadow, and nobody's been really able to overcome it. And I can't imagine Nick Saban doing it. If he showed up for a game or two, that would be fine. But having an office there is just too far.
Yeah, although I don't think that that's that out of the ordinary from what I understand.
I guess. I mean, these coaches are built differently, and, they've got a 365-day job, and they're probably always on the road. But for me, I would just want to establish my own identity. But to each their own, Mark. I mean, everybody is different. Maybe this is the way Kalen DeBoer wants to do it. Maybe he needs some mentorship. I know he did great at Washington, but the Pac-12 for most of the time has been a train wreck outside of this year, Mark. So, I mean, I'm just being truthful with it, the way I see it.
You're right. It was easy to pick on the. Yep.
It's amazing, Mark. Just because I talk trash about your team or your conference doesn't mean I hate your team or your conference or you as a person. I don't hate you as a person because I just trash talk about your team. I just think there's some flaws with your logic. But I don't think a lot of people can understand that, Mark.
And because the Pac-12 has been so bad and it was so much better in 2022 and then still continue to be better this year, we'll never find out because the demise of the league. But a lot of that had to do with some really good coaches coming into the league and also bringing quarterbacks with them. About 5 or 6 quarterbacks covered a lot of issues and improved things considerably. We're not talking about necessarily rosters and programs being that much better all of a sudden. It was more about coach and quarterback covering a lot of issues and then playing each other. The Pac-12 was not that dominant. Everybody went crazy. I know Pac-12 fans, and I was right there with you, applauding that there was some life in the conference and we could actually pay attention to the conference. I pay attention all the time, but I'm talking about America could finally pay attention to Pac-12 football and that there were meaningful November games and actual playoff contenders the last 2 years. But let's not go overboard. This was not a great conference. And when they played teams outside the conference, that was displayed.
Well, Mark, I actually want to take somewhat of an opposite approach to that when it comes to a different conference, the SEC. Everybody wants to bring down the SEC because people hate winners, Mark. I mean, everybody hates the Yankees. Everybody hates the Lakers because they win all the time. And I said last year, hey, the SEC was probably last year more dominant than any conference has ever been in the history of college football. Look at their wins. They beat every conference champion except the Big Ten because Michigan lost to TCU. Despite that, Georgia beat Ohio State. I mean, it was just insane the amount of wins they got. And now they lose a few games this year. I would argue they went back to the mean of where they normally are at. And you have people in this very chat, for example, saying, it's over, Mark. The SEC's over. The Big Ten is the new best conference. The SEC was all Alabama. The dynasty is dead. You know, all this stuff, Mark.
Well, that's how people talk about everything. They overreact to everything. And I will enjoy living in a college football world that has some variety and has these two Titan conferences going against each other. And maybe the Big Ten will be better. My guess is that it's going to be very inconclusive. That's going to be my guess. But yeah, the SEC is not going away. And there are still great programs in the SEC. And the SEC is going to be just fine, both at Alabama and elsewhere. And certainly with the 4 schools coming in from the Pac-12 and it coming a year later than Texas and Oklahoma, we've become accustomed to this Texas-Oklahoma edition. That's going to pack a punch that may... It's arguable whether the 4 going to the Big Ten are any better than the 2 going to the SEC. We'll wait and see, but it's on the surface, on paper, pretty close in terms of additions. And the SEC right now is a better conference. The current SEC of 2023 is a better conference than the Big Ten.
I think you might want to repeat that statement again, because there's been a lot of fans, particularly of the maize and blue variety, that don't agree with that statement.
Yeah. The SEC in 2023 is a better conference than the Big Ten of 2023.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all, Mark. And am I saying I haven't said on here, Mark, this year the SEC is clearly the best conference. I have not said that this year because I don't think that. I have said they are slight favorites. I put them slightly ahead of the Pac-12. I have the Big Ten third, the Big 12 fourth, and the ACC fifth. I had a Michigan fan, Mark, after Michigan beat Alabama, tell me the SEC was the 4th best conference. The 4th best. The overreactions to some of these things, I'm sure you've seen it with the talent rankings, Mark. All these people saying talent doesn't matter. It's just insane. People need to understand what the word outliers mean. People need to understand just because something happens once in every 26 years doesn't mean it's going to happen next year. Could you explain that to them?
Well, before I do that, let's understand. So I'm going to take both sides of this to a certain extent, because against you would be that you were wrong about Michigan this year.
And I've accepted that. I mean, they claim I haven't accepted that, but I credit Michigan. I've said they won the national championship. Yeah. And
Michigan won the national championship, and you thought basically there was no way that Michigan could win a national championship, and they did it.
Correct.
But that does not erase your viewpoint nor everything that has preceded it. Obviously, the most recent season is the most valid in terms of trying to determine what's going on in college football right now. What matters right now? If what happened in 2005, does that matter at all? Maybe a little bit, but probably not much. Is Ohio State still Ohio State, and is, et cetera, from 2005? Yes. But obviously the most recent results are the most valid, but that does not, just because one other conference wins a championship, defeats 2 teams to win a championship, a national title, that wipes out the SEC dominating the rest of the playoff over its entire history. Again, it has to be proven over and over that there's been a shift in power. This has to be proven. One game does not, especially a game that goes to overtime. And to me, that's not the sole evaluation. To a lot of people, that's the evaluation. Michigan beat Alabama. Therefore, the Big Ten has eclipsed the SEC because of one game that went to overtime and came down to a play at the goal line.
Completely agree with you. And I saw at least 3 people say who won the Big Ten this year, Mark. I mean, who won the national championship this year? And it's obviously the Big Ten, but the SEC had so many other wins, they were able to overcome Alabama losing to Michigan.
Yes, just over a decade, we have seen 3 teams in the ACC win championships, national championships, and the ACC wasn't even close to being the best conference. But Clemson was the best team, or at least they played the best and won the championship games. So they were the best team. You can have the best team in your conference, and then maybe the second best team is the 9th or 10th best team in the country. And there are a number of other teams from one particular conference that are second best, 4th best, 6th best. And that makes your conference better overall, top to bottom. The SEC is the best conference top to bottom, 1 through 14. And it's also the best conference in regards to good teams, decent teams, we'll say, above 500 bowl level or above teams. It's the best in both categories right now.
And do you think that it could have something to do with the recruiting rankings at all?
Yes, of course it does. Although it has less to do with recruiting class rankings, which makes my job more difficult because the recruiting rankings, some people don't like to hear this, but they have been amazingly accurate in telling us who the best teams in the country are for years and years and years. However, we do have a thing called the transfer portal. So that has, I don't know how much that is compromised, how much we can take from the recruiting rankings.
Right. That's why I look at the overall rankings from now on. You have recruiting, transfer, and overall takes into account the transfer portal.
But I don't know how well those services, 247 Sports in particular, for as great a job as they do, and they're my go-to. And anytime I look up recruiting rankings and anything related to that, to take the transfer additions and add that in, I'm sure they've come up with some kind of formula. I don't know how accurate it is.
Right. And all I'm saying, Mark, okay, is if you have an overall class that is less talented on paper than South Carolina, then the odds of you winning the championship next year after you won it this year is probably pretty slim, Mark. I would even go so far as to say it was kind of a fluke. This was kind of a flukish season, Mark. Let's just be honest about it. You had a team going 13-0, left out of the playoff. You had a team in 12-1 in Georgia lose by 3 points to Alabama that missed the play. That wasn't even considered for the playoff. You had an Ohio State team that went 11-1 and lost to Michigan on their final drive. Not even considered for the playoffs. What other season would any of those things happen and those teams not even being argued to make the playoffs?
Yeah. I can come up with just a few examples over the course of a 10-year playoff. So all of those things happening in one season is an aberration. Yes.
Right. I know the Michigan fans don't want to hear it because, Mark, I've had Michigan fans tell me that they're now the number 1 program in all of college football. Not team, program in all of college football, that they've surpassed Georgia.
Yeah, well, some people don't understand the difference between team and program. That has been apparent to me in many discussions through the years.
I got you. I can tell you're liking this conversation, so I'll keep it going.
Mark. Yeah, we do have a caller behind you, so we'll
just one, because from everybody in this chat is disagreeing with me, and I would hope they would call in and explain why I'm wrong. Because instead of just hurling insults at me, I would love for them to call in and explain their line of thinking using evidence and clear logical reasoning, Mark. And if they want to call me names, that's fine. I don't mind them calling me names because I can handle that.
Michigan versus the world is asking, what has Georgia done? I don't even understand that statement exactly. I don't know if they're referring to this particular season or over the last few seasons.
Georgia is undefeated in the last 3 years when playing every team not named Alabama. Is that pretty good?
Yes, it is
Uh,
exceptionally good. We just had Keith join us. I don't know if, and then we're going to get to Michael, but we had Keith join us. I don't know if he's specifically wanting to duke it out with you. We will find out. Keith,
In a
how you doing
minute.
tonight?
Oh, great, Mark. I'm glad to have a chance to talk both to you and to Real.
Yes. What would you like to add to the conversation?
I would add to the conversation that perhaps he's running into the Michigan fans that are trolling DeReal back. Because I think a lot of what DeReal has been doing has been trolling this year.
See, this is something I've heard a lot, that I'm trolling, or I don't believe in my actual opinions. Mark, if I just was trolling, I wouldn't state facts and evidence and use historical data to prove my points. Everything I say, I believe in. Now, just because you disagree with it doesn't make it automatically trolling.
What about DeReal when you said Michigan was going to lose to Ohio State by 22 or 23 points, and I asked you to give me those points? You said no.
I'm not sure what you're talking about. I had Ohio State losing this year. I told Mark that Ohio State was going to lose this game because they were soft. Hummus Hero, who is an Ohio State fan, has vouched for this in the past.
That's true.
I said in 2022 that Michigan was going to win. I even said to Mike Ford, who is a Michigan fan, before he was ready to admit Michigan was going to beat Ohio State, that Michigan looked like the better team throughout the season at that point, and I thought they were going to beat Ohio State. I believe in 2021 I picked Michigan to upset Ohio State. So I don't know what you're getting at.
I seem to remember a week or two before the Ohio State game, you were saying that Ohio State was on a par with Georgia and could fight and give Georgia a battle, but Georgia would beat Michigan by 22 or 23 points, and that's what drove me to ask you to give me 22 or 23 points against Ohio State.
Now, I've talked about the difference between playoff games and regular season games. So, for example, in playoff games, the more talented team usually absolutely dominates these games. So I don't remember me making this specific comment, but if that I was, that's probably what I was talking about. And I believe in 2022, I said Ohio State is one of the two teams that I thought could actually beat Georgia, which was Ohio State and Alabama, because of the style of football they play. Because if you remember in 2021, Michigan's line of scrimmage couldn't compete at all with Georgia. I mean, they just got absolutely trounced. And I saw no evidence to tie it into this year that Michigan had improved from that 2021 team or even the 2022 team. If you look at Michigan's record against them versus Penn State, I would argue Michigan did better or worse this year against Penn State than they did last year. I would say the same thing about Ohio State, that in 2021 and 2022, Michigan dominated Ohio State more than they did in 2023. I would argue that Michigan played a significantly more talented team and a more proven team in Alabama than they did in 2021 and 2022. So that's why I picked Alabama to dominate Michigan. And I think that's very reasonable. What do you think about that, Mark?
Well, I know that going back to Keith's original point, that you have held firm that Ohio State's just built differently than Michigan, and Michigan has obviously become a more physical team than Ohio State and has won these games. But then Ohio State goes out and plays the game that they did against Georgia last year, against one of the greatest teams we've seen in a long, long time, and takes them right down to the wire. And it's really especially difficult to see Michigan doing the same thing. So there are matchups. We're talking about a matchup sport. So it doesn't always go in specific order that the best is the best, the second best is the second best, the third best, and on down the line. Yes, when you put their entire season together and everyone they play, you can come up with some kind of order, but that doesn't mean 7 can't beat 4 and 5 can't beat 3 because of matchups.
Right. I'm pretty sure I mentioned that to you this year when talking about the Ohio State-Michigan game. I'm pretty sure I told it to you and John that if Ohio State had their 2022 team, I would feel much more confident that they would have been able to beat this Michigan team. I just think this, unironically, if we flipped Ohio State's teams over the last 2 years, I think they would have been 2-0 against Michigan. I think they just had the wrong team for the wrong versions of Michigan.
Yeah, I was more confident with this Ohio State team, and I think that showed on the field. They were more physical. They had a better running game, but mostly just because of the defense. Now, obviously, shoot, if CJ Stroud's in that game, I got to think Ohio State wins that, but he's off to the NFL, of course, so he's not on the team. But I thought Ohio State was better this year than the previous years.
Right. And Mark, I know this is going to upset Michigan fans, but this is just what I believe in. Even though Michigan won the national title, they went 15-0. I'm not sure they're the best team, Mark, okay? I think Georgia is the best team in the country. Now, they don't have any way to prove it on the football field. Michigan won the national championship. But just seeing what Georgia did all year into teams that were comparable to Penn State and Ohio State, I mean, Georgia just looked so dominant in those types of games, Mark. I mean, what can I say?
Which was the Ole Miss game.
Right, the Ole Miss game. I mean, Tennessee, they did really well as well.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to put Tennessee in Ohio State and Penn State's class, but
fair enough. Well, they're better than Iowa. Can we at least say that?
Yes, they are better than Iowa. I think our sample size is rather small, like it typically is in these college football debates.
Right. But
so, Mark, are we going back to the world where Vegas picks the CFP champion at the beginning of the year, and then we don't have to play any games and risk any injuries?
Well, I've never been in favor of that. No,
but it seems like Durio's argument is let's pick who Vegas likes the most and crown them the champion.
Well, let's understand something. And I understand where the Michigan fan is in the catbird seat. They won the national championship. Absolutely. They have every right to think that they are not just the best team this year, but maybe the best team for a number of years. That's obvious. You're the national champion. However, let's also understand that I listen to countless Michigan fans for month after month after month after month after month after month tell me that after losing to TCU that they were the better team and that was a fluke. And I said, I get it. You have data, and it's not like TCU was a 7-5 team. We're talking about comparable records. So you would think that the tie would be broken with who won the game. But Michigan fans were claiming in that instance that the better team did not win the game. But it's been ridiculous, apparently, for other suggestions to be made that the best team doesn't always win the game in other cases. Although after that TCU game, that was Michigan the fan base of Michigan for months and months and months and months, every day.
Guilty. I agree. And I agree that sometimes the less talented team beats the more talented teams. Like you and I talked before, Mark, because they're more physical and they're tougher. They're better on the football field than the other team.
Well, can I interrupt, Keith?
Yes.
So more talented and the best team, like you're pointing out, aren't necessarily the same thing. But I'm saying that not even the best team always wins. They're the best team. They're the best team on that day, but that doesn't mean the best team doesn't always win every game. I can give a million examples to that. They can't even be debated. I'm not talking about debatable examples. I'm talking about Ohio State loses to Purdue in 2018. Well, Ohio State's the best team in the conference. It's not even close. They win the Rose Bowl. They're 13-1. Well, Purdue's 6-7. They get trounced by 7 other teams. But on that day, they blew out Ohio State. They were the better team on that day. But were they the better team? No, they weren't. It wasn't even close. So the best team doesn't always win every game.
To me, that's a circular argument, Mark.
Okay.
I would say the best team that day does win. TCU was a better team on the day they beat us. They were the best team on the field that day.
Yep.
Okay, so, but you just said even the best team on that day doesn't always win.
No.
Okay, I got it wrong then.
Purdue played better than Ohio State on that day. That's obvious. But
Right.
they weren't a better football team.
I would agree with that, better football team, but I would argue that they were the best team on the field that day.
And when I say better team, I'm not just talking about talent. I'm talking about all of it put together. The results from 14 games proved that one team was better than the other, even though they lost on that day.
Right. I want to
Well,
get
Mark,
one.
if I can ask a question, are we not allowed to analyze anything about college football other than saying, well, Ohio State won this game 21-14. Georgia won this game 38-3. We can't put any context or nuance into anything other than just the scores, is what it sounded like here.
I don't think I said that. Did I, Mark?
No, you did not.
No. One thing I want to get DeReal's opinion on. I said to you before, Mark, that this defense for Michigan, and we were probably down in offense this year over the last 2 years, but we were slightly up in defense, and this defense is getting to be so good that I say they're 2021 Georgia-esque. And I have a hard time thinking, I still think that 2021 Georgia defense was better than this Michigan defense. But has there been another defense in the last 10 years, and I don't analyze it as much as you do, Mark, that has been better than this Michigan defense? I would give you 2021 Georgia, but is Michigan the second best conference champion defense in the last 10 years?
By performance on the field, probably. Now, if we're going to have more of a holistic approach and look at it, and if you would have included Georgia in that argument against Michigan, then I would have countered with, we'll see where these players are drafted and how good of NFL players they are. But if we're just talking about the 12 or 13 games that were played, or the 15 games that were played that particular season, yeah, this Michigan defense has been dominant. They weren't dominant against Maryland. They weren't dominant against Ohio State. They had stretches of dominance against Bama, and they dominated everyone else. Yeah, the Penn State running game was pretty successful against them. I don't know if that was a dominant effort. It was very good.
Yeah, but I'm talking about compared to the LSU Tigers, they had a really rather mediocre defense that year, right?
Yeah.
That they won with Burrow.
Yes.
I want to believe that this Michigan defense is one of the better ones in history, maybe Mount Rushmore-ish.
During the college football playoff era, yes.
Right. Okay. And does DeReal agree with that?
I can agree with that. I think the thing with me is Michigan fans take things all the way to the extreme. Like, we're a combination of 2019 LSU and 2016 Clemson or something like that with their elite defense. Where Michigan is the best team to ever play college football this year. I understand they won the national championship, and that's something they should be very proud of. But just saying the game has changed forever. We need to rewrite all the rules. That's where I have a problem with it. I want somewhere in the I can work with somewhere in the middle, like what Mark said. Just do I need to reevaluate the recruiting rankings? Probably. Tim brings up a good point. Oh, wait, USC and 01 Miami. Those were two elite defenses. In my opinion, 2011, both Alabama and LSU is better than both Georgia 2021 and Michigan 2023, but the game has changed. So hopefully I answered your question in there somewhere.
Yes, I'm not of the Michigan ilk believe that we're one of the best teams ever in the college football or the BCS era. That we're probably average as CFP champions go. I don't believe everybody was believing in the Pac-10 this year because they were winning games out of conference early in the season. And I never bought into that. To me, the Pac-10 has been suspect in defense for the last decade, like the Big 12, and that when they were going to face a SEC or Big 10 defense, they were going to be their flaws were going to show, and they lucked out and they got Texas, a Big 12 team that had serious holes in their defense. Their pass defense was very poor this year, and that was Washington's strength. So they got through that game because they hadn't seen that good defense yet. But Michigan's defense showed the Pac-12 just what their defenses were.
Well, Keith, what Michigan did to Washington was remarkable. And that's, if you're making a Michigan versus Pac-12 comparison, then that's the obvious. We don't know what Michigan would have done against Oregon, but they did what they did against Washington. And so they proved it. And that's all that matters. Football is football in that we don't have enough metrics. We don't have enough data points to truly understand. If we could see Michigan play Georgia, Michigan play Oregon, Michigan play, then we're not having much of a debate. If we could get to see them play this array of everybody who's any good in the country, but they stood up to the challenge that was in their path and were the best team.
Yes. I'll give you one stat that kind of points to the historic nature of this Michigan defense, and that was there's an advanced analytic that is called QBR differential.
Yep.
And what they're looking at is if this quarterback is got a QBR of 100 against everybody else, and they come to play you, and he gets a QBR of 50, then your score there is minus 50. You took 50 points off of that quarterback's QBR.
Sure.
And Isaiah Hole, when he went through his advanced analytics, he goes through 145 or 144 advanced analytics. And that statistic, Michigan's QBR differential was better than the 3 or 4 next teams put together. Is that D-line and that backfield made other quarterbacks look worse than other teams did by a great margin this year.
Yeah, I would love to know what that stat, and that's a remarkable stat. I'm not discounting that in any way, and it's a statistic. I can't argue a fact. I would be curious to see what that is against the best 4 or 5 opponents or 3 or 4 opponents, just because I thought that Maryland and Ohio State were pretty successful in the past game against Michigan. Now, Michigan had 2 key turnovers in both of those games, and that greatly hurts QBR. So that's part of it. But yeah, they had a great day against Jalen Milroe. They had a great day, obviously, against Michael Penix. That is the crown jewel right there. Actually, Ohio State threw the ball against Michigan better than anybody else, and Maryland right behind them.
Would it be fair to say that both Milroe and Penix were both not just under pressure, but under duress much of that game that contributed mightily to those interceptions?
Oh, well, absolutely. Well, sure. Yeah.
So does that make this defense as elite as I'm giving it credit for? Not the team, just the defense.
Oh, absolutely. So any play that is made counts. If a quarterback on the other team and a wide receiver have a miscommunication and the ball's thrown right to a cornerback who's just standing out in the middle of nowhere and he brings it back for a touchdown, well, that's more the discredit to the other team. They made this horrible unforced error. All you had to do is catch the football and run. But the kind of plays that you're talking about, I think that those are truly, a lot of people will make excuses for their teams and say, well, we committed 3 turnovers or we committed 4 turnovers, like they're all created equal. They're not created equal. Some are unforced. Some are because the defense made outstanding plays. The interception that Penix made to start the second half, I forget who it was. I think it was Mason Graham, just completely threw the center or guard in his lap against him, and it forced him to just flutter the ball up, and Will Johnson made the pick. That's an outstanding defensive play.
Yep. Going back to the Ohio State game, let's be fair to McCord. The first interception was a bad decision by McCord. It had nothing to do with the pressure or duress he was under. But that last interception, he was under great duress. There were people. Yeah. So
I'm not faulting any quarterback who gets his arm hit. Once he gets his arm hit, he's no longer Tom Brady or Peyton Manning. He's any one of us because the ball's just fluttering up in the air.
Right.
So yeah, that was a great play by, again, that's the Michigan defense forcing that turnover. And that's even the first one, even though McCord should have been wiser with a football. And I remember Joel Klatt actually thinking that Marvin Harrison should have been more aggressive and fighting through Will Johnson. But it was not a good look that McCord, he didn't have an open look and he still just threw it blindly. Will Johnson still just made an outstanding play on the ball that not many cornerbacks make.
Right.
I thought that the interceptions that they made against Maryland, Sanders still made one down the sideline that was a remarkable play on the ball that most cornerbacks do not have those kind of ball skills.
Right.
And that's why I named those 2 my co-defensive players of the year in the Big Ten.
Yes. Mark, you never did not give Michigan enough credit on defense. You're absolutely right. And there's a third corner in there because Sanders our nickel guy, but Josh Wallace was a solid corner too.
Yes.
Yeah. And when we had that cover 1 defense against the 3 Alabama receivers, it was just very difficult for Milroe to throw against that coverage. And then we were killing him in the pocket.
Oh, especially in the first half. He didn't have a chance.
Yeah. So, like I say, is that realistically, we had a historic defense this year. And if we can keep our coaches, and that's why I'm glad Alabama didn't get Michigan, because if we would have taken Minter and Elston and with him and Ben, our strength and conditioning, Ben Herbert, if you would have taken those guys down to Alabama with him, it would be scary what those guys could do with the Alabama talent, that's the Alabama 5 stars and the high 4 stars they get down there, that would be absolutely scary, and you would see Alabama on another good run again. But I don't know if Kalen DeBoer has got the great defensive mind of Sabin. We'll see.
Very good, Keith. Great stuff. Anything else?
No, that's good. I just
The
wanted to.
Anything else?
No, it's good talking to a Michigan fan that actually wants to come in here and talk to me instead of just arguing in the chat and calling me names. I respect Keith for actually coming on here and not just being a keyboard warrior. I'm hoping more Michigan fans call in and explain why I'm completely wrong. And listen, they won the championship, so they could deserve all the smack talk. I understand how it goes, Mark. I mean, listen, you have a 1% type year, Mark, and it happens, okay? I mean, 1 in 100 years, Michigan wins not a split national championship, okay? So I got it wrong. But Mark, next year is Michigan to win it all? I doubt it, okay? And I could say that for every team because of the 12-team playoff going for it. We'll talk about more in the offseason, but I got some fun Michigan predictions I'm sure Michigan fans are going to love. So anyway, Mark, that's all I got for you. Thank you for having me on this long.
Appreciate it. Keith, thank you so much for being here.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Let's keep it rolling. Before I take Michael, we appreciate your patience. I'm going to take your call in 2 seconds. I'm going to hit these super chats. We've got Keith, who was just on. Thank you so much for the contribution, Keith. I appreciate that. I would have thanked you directly, but I did not make the connection here. Keith is making a poll here. Has the Reels analysis of Michigan been more accurate or faulty? So I think we've covered that ground sufficiently, but thank you, Keith. And Nick says Alabama missed their opportunity to get Mel Tucker. Absolutely, they did. I can't imagine somebody not wanting to snap up one Mel Tucker. All right. Welcome in, Mr. Michael Hogue.
Hey, Mark. How you doing, sir?
I am doing just fine. I appreciate your patience.
I won't be long because I got to get ready to start getting ready for basketball game. But, hey, I got to ask you this. With Washington coming into the Big Ten, how much of a setback do you see this for them starting next season?
Well, there's a setback joining a better conference, but there's also a setback in that they are losing one of the best coaches in the country. Mm-hmm. And they're losing one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And I have not checked the draft status of those 3 wide receivers, but I got to imagine 2, if not all 3 of those wide receivers are gone. Their best pass rusher. Now, every top-notch program has to deal with loss and churn in the roster, and they've got a much different quarterback situation coming up with Will Rogers, who's a dink and dunk air raid system guy. So they have a lot of adjustments to make. It's a completely different program now. If you take out the heart and soul with Kalen DeBoer and his right-hand guy and Michael Penix and a lot of other NFL players, and now they're going to play a different style of, well, I don't know if they're going to play a different style of football, but they're going to be playing in a more physical conference.
Mm-hmm. Now, who do you think will be, have a somewhat of a better season next year, Washington, or is he going to tell after once everything gets started and everything's settled down?
Washington or who?
Bama.
Bama?
Yeah.
Give me Alabama.
Okay, second thing.
Yes. I'll take Alabama all day in that comparison.
I think they take a solid setback, but I still think Bama might be an 8 or 9 win team next year, but we'll see. But that said, how fast do you think Washington goes after Jed Fish? Or does he leave Arizona?
Somebody else had suggested that, and I think that on the surface, that would be a great move for him, and that would be a great move for Washington. That makes total sense to me. He's moving into one of the power conferences, and he's leaving a top 40 or 50. And our buddy Andrew Pinto would not want to hear this, who always comments to me every day on Twitter about his beloved Arizona Wildcats, but moving from a top 40 or 50 program in the country to a top 15 to 20 program in the country, and you're moving into the power belt, meaning the Big Ten or the SEC, unless he would go there and find something that he didn't like about the administration or the school or something. I would think that, that would be one of the first calls that they would make.
If that's the case, who does Arizona go after, you think?
Oh, boy. Who do they go after? Who's tearing it up in the group of 5 right now? Who's tearing it up in the Mountain West? Well, you got Jeff Traylor at Texas San Antonio.
Yeah.
There's an idea right there.
Sure. No, I was wondering because I didn't know how things was going to go and stuff like that. But yeah, because National sign, what was that going on? I guess the transfer portal opens up next? What's the deal? Something about transfer, something opens up next week?
No, the transfer portal has been open. It just closed.
Oh, okay. That's what I was thinking. I didn't know and stuff like that. But
now there are players in the transfer portal who have yet to make a decision. So not all the decisions have been made, but everybody who has entered the transfer portal is basically closed, except for there's a couple of loopholes out there. Plus, all the Alabama players now have 30 days to enter the portal because of Nick Sabin leaving.
Same thing with Washington.
Same thing with Washington. Yes.
All right, but I guess how much of a coincidence is it that both Bill Belichick and Nick Saban steps down within a day of each other?
Well, I do believe it's a coincidence, but how much of one is it? It's a huge one because we're talking about, and if we want to throw in Pete Carroll, 3 of the greatest coaches of all time.
Do you think he might go back to college, or do you think Pete Carroll will want to stay in the NFL?
Pete Carroll, 72 years old. I don't know if he wants to work anymore. I don't know if he's made any statements. I have not seen any. He's from all indications, he's still extremely energetic and lively and sharp, and was doing a heck of a job still at Seattle. What they do this year? They went like 9-8,
something like that.
So I don't know if he wants to continue to work or not. I have no idea, but I would think that he would stay in the NFL. I don't know that Pete Carroll, even with his sharp mind and energy, wants to get back into college football. I wouldn't want to coach in college football. Sign me up all day for the NFL. I would be an NFL coach any day before being a college football coach.
Yeah. Last thing before I let you go and stuff like that. Did Sabin actually work as defensive assistant for Belichick when he was in Cleveland?
Yes.
Thought so.
Oh, yeah.
And were they already friends and stuff like that before that?
Yes.
Through their dad and stuff like that? I'm not sure.
Yes.
All right. So now it's the offseason. What's in store for the voice of college football?
Well, we just keep working. I've got all sorts of ideas. I don't know if everyone loves the ideas that I have for rankings and ratings and all sorts of other things, but we will have one of our yearly get-togethers where we kind of go over the state of the voice of college football, and we'll talk about all those things.
Okay. So now when you take your 2-week siesta?
Oh, good Lord. I want to take one, but I'm also looking to move, so that's going to take up some time. And I actually started something that it deals with the business here, but I'm not going to get into it. That's going to take up a lot of my time that I started yesterday. So that's a 3-month program. So
because you said you're going to take a vacation for the last 4 years and you still have yet to do so, sir.
Well, I appreciate you, Michael, looking out for me. I did go to Connecticut to visit my kids for about 3 or 4 days. Now, when we weren't exactly doing stuff, I was still doing a little bit of work here and there, but we'll make it happen. I made the statement earlier. You probably weren't around when somebody made a nice, and I appreciate it every time somebody makes this statement about me being the hardest working man on YouTube. I told them that amongst my many goals this year was to not be the hardest working man on YouTube. That is one of my goals, to be a medium working man on YouTube.
Yeah, I did see that earlier and stuff like that. Yep. All right. I got to start getting ready for my game, and I hope I don't tee anybody. Yep. I don't want to try to tee anybody up tonight. Then. But anyway, thanks, Mark. And when's your next live stream?
I have no idea. Have a good game.
All right.
Michael.
See you, Mike.
Thanks for calling.
Bye.
Yeah, that's another thing. If I didn't have all these team channels and all these team shows to deal with, then I would set up a regular schedule, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8 o'clock, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 8 o'clock, Tuesday and Thursday at noon, or whatever. I would like to have a regular call-in show for everyone, and so all of you knew what the schedule is. But my problem is that I've got a USC show I do, an Ohio State show, an Iowa show, a Nebraska show, Florida State show, a Miami show. What am I missing? Thanks to people like John D'Adamo, who's taken over the Michigan show, and Joey Foster's taken over the West Virginia show, that I've gotten a little relief there. But so I already have a set schedule of taking up about 11 hours of my time right there. And yeah, so much of what involves being successful on here has nothing to do with the content and keeping up with college football and producing good content and doing live streams. It has to do with just a lot of stuff that we need to get accomplished this year. I want to go back real quick to, so we got Erica. Thank you so much for this. And then I want to go back to one of John D'Adamo's, one of his posts. Erica, thank you so much for this. Mark, Iowa's wide receiver coach is no longer with the program. Who should we go after? Oh, combing through wide receiver coaches. I think one may come with the new offensive coordinator, whoever that ends up being. Well, okay. Well, I'm going to make a very obvious statement, Erica, because I can't say that even though if I went through every college football coaching staff and started to look at their wide receiver coaches, I would know a fairly large majority of them. But to sit here and try to figure out who Iowa should go after, I'm going to make a simple analysis that anytime there's a situation like this, you need to look at who is the obvious choices, go after who's succeeding at the wide receiver position. But I think for Iowa, it's a little bit different. Who is taking decent talent, not great talent, not top end talent, who's taking 3-star type talent and developing them into some NFL players, and more importantly, productive collegiate players and a cohesive wide receiver core that plays a similar style of offense as Iowa. That would really narrow the field, and then that particular person would want to switch jobs and come to Iowa. So let me think about this for a second. Let me think about who has a similar offense, and I'm not talking about in regards to productivity, because you don't want those. In terms of style, Oregon State, and I'm talking about this in very general terms, Oregon State, Kansas State, Pitt, and I'm sure there's other ones out there. So again, I would go through kind of a 3 or 4 step process that I hopefully laid out there fairly clearly. But that's a great question. That is a great question. But I don't have any specific names for you. Lemansky, thank you for your Hawkeye show in 2023. We trying hard to rectify our offense. I tell you, that's going to be fun to watch, though. New offensive coordinator coming in. And then will this offense be better? It's got to be better. It is just unfathomable for me to think about this offense just continuing to get worse. Being the worst and then amplifying that by being the worst by an even greater margin and being shut out by 3 teams. Was anybody else in college football shut out by 3 teams? I don't believe so. Yeah. But let me ask you, thank you. Erica, thank you. Appreciate you all being here. Yeah, there was one last thing with John here, but I have long since lost that comment. But basically, John posted, folks, let's be kind in the chat. You can talk trash. When I say talk trash, Michigan's not that great because they lucked out against whatever. Or Michigan, go blue, we're the best, the Buckeyes suck. Fine. Have at it. But please do not attack people. Do not call them names. You know what? Some people don't mind that, but you don't know who does mind it and who does not. And we would like to be better than that. Let's aspire to be better than that. And I will do the same. I will do my best to do the same. Because many times I got to say that when I really don't feel like explaining why that particular person is wrong and why their opinion is really flawed, I will throw out some names myself just because I just feel like saying, you know what, you're a... And that's probably one of the reasons why these shows shouldn't go much past 2 hours. All right. We do appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. And we do have an exciting programming note to announce here very soon, but not right now. Got to work out the details. Let everyone know where they stand and what we are doing. So we will have an exciting addition to the lineup here at the Voice of College Football here in the next week or so. Thank you so much for being here. And we will see you all sometime this weekend, whether it's live or you will see videos, of course, breaking down everything that's going on with college football.